all school subjects. The standoff between parents from the northern areas of Port Elizabeth and the Education Department is seemingly far from being resolved. The bulk of the schools in the area have been closed since the second week of school opening, as parents are demanding teacher vacancies and other issues to be addressed. The Department for Education, however, has already kick-started a number of interventions, but the parents have vowed to keep their children out of school until the demands have been met. But first, before we get into this discussion, let's have a look at this insert.
Empty classrooms and quiet playgrounds as parents keep learners at home. But the issues are not new, and the parents from the northern areas say they have been knocking on the door of the Education Department for years. Last year, protest action led to the closure of more than 50 schools for 2 weeks.
The effects in the classroom it's dire, if we put it like that bluntly. It's tragic because we've been fighting to improve the situation for our kids in our schools since 2010. Over the last 5 years, there have been protest actions to address the issue.
Talks between the Education Department, the parents and the Northern Areas Forum is ongoing. Providing proper school and qualified teachers is on top of the department's agenda. As part of the interventions, 98 teachers have been appointed to fill vacancies in the Nelson Mandela Bay area.
It is a very high priority for us to make sure that educators are appointed. But we will not compromise on compliance with processes, but most importantly for me, an educator has to be appropriately qualified.
Some of the parents feel the government has taken too long to act. They are tired of the talking and promises and will only suspend their protest when they see their promises fulfilled.
Is that these demands are nothing new. It's been coming on for many years. So the petition handed over today, we want answers by tomorrow, and it has to be positive answers.
On Thursday, frustrations boiled over and parents took to blockading roads with burning tires while they forcefully closed 2 schools that were teaching. They want all schools to stand united.
We are closing all the schools that are open because we have said in a meeting where we invited all the schools, SGBs, everybody, parents, to come to a meeting at Sanctuary, where in that meeting it was open for everybody to view their views, and in that meeting it was said that all the schools in the northern areas must be closed until the 4 demands are met.
The affected learners are becoming increasingly concerned about the education time they are losing. They would prefer to be back at school while the issues are being dealt with.
We come here today and yesterday, the people were fighting in front of our school, which is wrong. We want education. How are we going to go forward if there is no education?
And the people can burn tires in front of our school. They want to keep us away from our school and stuff. All I want to say is that I want education.
Several role players have also called on the irate parents to suspend their protest and reopen the schools. Iwe Poti, SABC News, Port Elizabeth.
Now, to unpack today's topic, we are joined in studio by Mr. Elijah Mhlanga, Department of Basic Education spokesperson. I would also like to welcome Ms. Kate Peterson, an attorney from Section 27. And lastly, on the line, we'll be joined by Mr. Ndutuzo Nzomo, Deputy Secretary General from Equal Education. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you on Rights and Recourse this afternoon. Now, Elijah, 50 schools have been closed in Port Elizabeth. Surely that can't be right?
It can't be right. I mean, that type of conduct has never yielded any positive results anyway, because what is happening every day is that we are losing time, and the time that we lose, the time that is taken away from school, it means that learning and teaching is not taking place, and it's very difficult to recover. There will be a point at which some very difficult decisions will have to be made, because there's a point at which no recovery plan can work for you. So we appeal to the communities in that area to work with us. I mean, the MEC and the HOD and other senior officials spend a week in that area trying to listen to the community, trying to resolve the issues there. But even though some work has been done, some commitments have been made, and some appointments have also been made, it seems the community is refusing to budge, and that cannot be right.
Now, what's in the core of these grievances? We know that parents close down schools, they're refusing to take their children back to school. What is the actual problem?
There are several things there. It's unfortunate that it's only one issue that is getting attention, but what's happening is that they're demanding that teachers be appointed in that area. The Eastern Cape Education Department says we need to appoint teachers in that general area of Nelson Mandela, but they're only focusing on the northern areas. But nevertheless, the appointments have been made in that area in terms of the teacher shortage issue that they had raised. The other issue is that there were schools that had applied to be placed under the Section 21 provision, which would mean that the administration and budgeting of the finances in those particular schools will fall under them. And that has been reached. I mean, the request that they made has been acceded to. The government there has agreed to do that, to place them under Section 21, and they've been given the letters as they had requested. So why that type of action would still be in place, it's really baffling.
All right. Kate, let's come to you. Already, Eastern Cape is a province that's already struggling when it comes to productivity and good results, or quality education when it comes to the country in general. Do you think that perhaps this is going to affect, in a furthermore, or rather looking forward, this is going to affect the general results of 2016?
If a catch-up plan can't be in place, then yes, it will affect the results in those specific schools. I'm not sure about overall. But what we're seeing more and more is that these protests are being used to close schools down. And it is problematic. We understand why they're protesting, but it is problematic because we have compulsory schooling. So learners are supposed to be in schools, and their parents are also responsible for that. So if parents are preventing learners from attending schools, then we have a problem. But we also have a problem when parents are forced to send their children to schools that are physically dangerous to them. So we've seen that it's not only in the Eastern Cape, there are also schools in Limpopo that haven't opened yet this year because of shoddy infrastructure which parents refuse to send their children to. And I think we shouldn't be asking whether these protests will necessarily have an effect on the National Senior Certificate results at the end of the year. What we need to be asking is the core problems that they're protesting against are key problems in all of the poor provinces. And because those key problems are still there, so for instance, the one school in Limpopo had its roof blown off in 2011, and can only use 4 out of 9 classrooms, and that's been the case since 2011, then what that means is that those learners can't, I mean, how can you pass if you don't have a roof over your head?
All right. What is the department doing, Elijah? We do understand that you've got initiatives, especially prevention measures that are put in place, but the schools, especially the Eastern Cape, the issue of infrastructure is nothing new. We've had students, or rather learners, who have been learning the education system. They don't have shelters. They've been under trees. We've had in Limpopo in the past couple of years, we had the issue of textbooks, and also the Eastern Cape as well. What other preventative measures do you have?
Well, 2 things. The first one is that provinces have their own budgets, infrastructure budgets, which they're supposed to spend on infrastructure, making sure that schools are rebuilt, those that have been blown off by the wind or whatever natural causes, those schools need to be restored, and that should be done as quickly as possible so that the business of education can continue. But as a national department, we also have our own program, which is called ASIDI, which is also used to build schools, particularly focusing on those areas which have mud schools, most of them in the Eastern Cape, and also those provinces where they have schools built of inappropriate material. We've got schools that are built of metal and asbestos and those type of things. And there we are working, we're making progress. About 135 schools have since been built to replace the poorly built schools. And that type of work is going on because we understand that infrastructure is basic. Those type of things need to be in place before anything can happen in education. But we now need to look at the progress that the national department is making versus the progress that provinces are making, because they are at the level of delivery where the actual work of provision of services, of education services, needs to be delivered. So we are all working towards achieving that same objective. But whether we are working at the pace that is required, that's another matter. Because we've also seen a situation where some provinces have returned money to Treasury unspent, although there are still schools that are not fixed, like the one she's referred to in Limpopo. 4 or 5 years later, I mean, that's completely unacceptable.
Now, let's revert back to the core issue behind these protests. Why do we have still have a huge number of vacancies that have not been filled in the Eastern Cape. We've had temporal teachers. If you have temporal teachers, why not fill those vacancies?
Yeah, you know, the challenge of northern areas is peculiar only to that particular area, because there you have teachers who could go and teach there, but they are not able to do so because of all sorts of political things that are happening in that area. I mean, I've been there myself. During the exams, I was there to monitor what was taking place there. And what you find on the ground, it makes you realize that the whole story is not being told. And I just believe that and hope that one day the full story, yes, the full story will be told, because if we can get down to the real story of what is really happening there, you will then understand that it's not that as a department we are failing, it's because there are certain people that are resisting every solution that you're proposing to them. I mean, they want teachers of a specific type to be employed there. That's why the HOD, acting HOD, was even saying in that instance that there is an insistence that even unqualified teachers should be appointed because they come from that area. I mean, you can't do that. You need to comply.
Right. Okay, now let's go to Mr. Ndutugo, or rather Ndutuzo Nzomo, who's joining us on the line. Ndutuzo, here's the Department of Basic Education saying that there are certain individuals that are resisting change or rather solutions to the Eastern Cape problem. Do you agree? Ndutuzo? All right, it seems like we've got a problem with Ndutuzo's line. But now let's get to the issue of the placement as you've spoken about. You're saying that there are certain individuals who are resisting change, but in terms of collaboration, especially with stakeholders, or rather calling out, we know that a few weeks ago we had the MEC, or rather the Premier of the province, calling out to the private sector to come and join, to come and invest a financial injection to make sure that, they better improve the standard and the quality of education in the Eastern Cape. Do you think that perhaps there's going to be a better move, or rather remedial?
Yeah, it should. You see, the thing is, we really need to work together, all of us. Let's stop pointing fingers at each other. Let's collaborate. And we've seen private business coming on board through the NECT, National Education Collaboration Trust, saying, we have analyzed your results, we have analyzed the different reports that we've produced, but also we have looked at what civil society is saying in terms of where the challenges are, and we move into those particular areas to assist you, whether it's in the district office, capacitating managers for better governance, or whether it's identifying solutions that can work, that have proven to work in the private sector. All of those things are now being brought on board, because we realize that it's only through partnership that things can turn around, particularly in the Eastern Cape, because you also have a situation where some teachers don't want to work in particular areas of the Eastern Cape due to the nature of the province. But we believe that if we work together, we should be able to turn around the situation in the province.
All right, well, if we work together, there could be a solution. That's Mr. Elijah Mhlanga, Department of Basic Education spokesperson. After the break, we'll be speaking to Mr. Ndutuzo Nzomo, Deputy Secretary General from Equal Education. You're still watching Question Time right here on SABC News Channel 44. You can join me. Send me your tweets. It's Rights Recourse. And, of course, send me your emails. That's rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. Stay with us. Hello?
Hi.
I can't hear Ndutuzo. Ndutuzo?
I
can hear him now. Hi, Ndutuzo.
Sorry,
I
was responding to your question and I don't know what happened.
Oh, there's a delay. Well, welcome back. You're still watching Rights and Recourse right here on SABC News Channel 44. Today, we are discussing the crippling issues in the basic department education. And like I said before the break, we're now joined by Mr. Ndutuzo Nzomo, Deputy Secretary General from Equal Education. Mr. Nzomo, thank you so much for joining us on Rights and Recourse this afternoon, and welcome.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Now, clearly there is a big problem in the Eastern Cape. 50 schools have been shut down. Parents are demanding placement of teachers, among some of the issues. We've got Mr. Elijah Mhlanga in studio saying that there are certain forces that are resisting solutions in the province. It's not entirely a fail upon the province, or rather the department itself, the Department of Education. Do you agree with his sentiments?
I disagree, because I think the frustration from the parents in PE that we are seeing as South Africans is something which many parents around the country currently have, where they feel as if the department is not doing enough to make sure that their children get quality education. And the issue is, and the reality is that, you know, the rural provinces of South Africa are facing a crisis. And not a lot is being done to remedy the situation. For example, in Limpopo, the department does not know the infrastructure problems. 75% of the schools in that province, they don't know the infrastructure problems of that province, and it's quite concerning. And for a province such as the Eastern Cape, which is still under Section 100, the national department should be more involved, because we've seen that the provincial leadership has not done enough to try and solve the problem within that province.
Now, let's talk about, I do understand that as the organization, you basically advocate for better quality, or rather better education. Let's talk about some of the solutions that perhaps you'd call proposed solutions to the issue that's facing the province.
The first thing which needs to happen, the MEC needs to be engaging with the community and listening to their concerns, because what's currently happening now, the media is giving us this perception that the problem lies with the parents, that they're the ones that are blocking students from attending, you know, school. And the media is not talking to the real issues that these parents are raising. And these issues that are being raised by these parents are issues that many parents around that province are actually raising. The mere fact that, you know, there's teacher shortage. Just last year, there was a school that was going to be closed down, and the learners were going to be put into another school. And you know, the way it was shown, it looked as if like the parents were against, you know, these new remedies by the provincial department. But the reality was that the parents had not been consulted, and the plan was not clear what was going to happen when their kids actually moved to another school. Parents are getting to a stage where they want, you know, to be consulted. They want to be involved in their children's education. And us as Equal Education, we feel as if that's important for parents to be vocal about the issues in their schools. And we cannot, you know, sugarcoat it and say that it's forces that are making it difficult for the provincial department to deliver what they're meant to deliver to begin with. We need to remember that education, you know, it's a realizable right. And it's a right which needs to take effect as soon as possible. And when we don't solve the small things, the small challenges, they're making the issue much more bigger than it is.
All right. Well, let's come to you, Elijah. Here's a right, Equal Education rather, saying you are not doing enough as the department.
It's interesting that it says education is immediately realizable, but it's supporting parents who are blocking schools, who are shutting schools down. It doesn't make sense to me. What you should be saying is that let the problem be solved, because to tell the truth, it's not all the schools that need teachers immediately. I mean, I was there last year. I saw that education can take place. Let's isolate the issues. Allow the business of education to take place. Allow education service to take place, to continue. For those schools that can continue, let's isolate those schools that need teachers and address that. But to block the whole place, I mean, that's not being vocal. It's actually being violent.
50 schools is quite a big number.
It is, Elijah, a big number.
Does this mean that, especially when it comes to the issue of placements, I mean, you talk about education being a right and that it should be offered, the program of education itself should not be interrupted.
Yes.
But who is to give those services when there are no teachers?
No, I'm saying to you, teachers are there. The learners are learning. What we are saying is that there are not enough teachers. I'm saying let's list the schools that are in need. Find teachers, send them there so the business can continue. But to bend tires, to stop learners from going to school when they are crying for education themselves, that cannot be fair. Let's isolate the issues, sit down, talk about the issues, allow education to take place. It's not as easy as that. We've identified there are also weaknesses in our own offices, in the district offices. We need to acknowledge that. let's say, here are the challenges, how do we get around them while learning and teaching is taking place?
Talking about separating issues, Kate, let's come to you. The issue of infrastructure is quite huge in the Eastern Cape. Yeah. According to your studies, or rather surveys, how big is the problem?
In the Eastern Cape, it's a massive problem. In Limpopo, it's a massive problem. I think that I would first just like to respond for 1 second. I think part of the problem that we have is that these protests are actually yielding results, and frank discussions are not.
When you're saying results, what exactly are you talking about?
Well, what we're seeing is that the schools where people are protesting are getting the attention that they require, and generally the problems are solved much quicker than they are when, for instance, we write letters on behalf of schools to the department, including the national department. We can write a number of letters over the course of a number of years and things still don't happen. And then when these protests happen, when people burn tires, it's unfortunate and it's actually unacceptable. But at the same time, this is when the department listens.
All right. Elijah, it really seems like the Department of Education is willing to listen only when there's at least a violent action, a bit of action. We saw this on the Fees Must Fall. As much as you were not really the core of the issue of Fees Must Fall, it was Higher Department of Education. But here's Kate saying that at least these protests are yielding results. Is this the way, futuristically speaking, is this how we're going to communicate with the government?
They're not yielding results because the burden will be on the department to have to go back with a recovery plan that will ensure that those learners are able to catch up. We still need to do a lot of work to make sure that we catch up on lost time. It will be the municipality that must go and clean up there. So that to me, it's actually doubling the problem because you being violent, schools are shut down, learners are sitting at home. There's general lawlessness in that area, affecting not just education, but the entire community there.
But to the general public, it appears that's the language that the government understands.
That's completely incorrect. There are many other issues that are raised with us. We receive many letters that we attend to on a daily basis. I mean, if that were the case, then the whole country would be burning. But that's not the case, because we listen. Those individuals that write letters, we meet them, we solve issues even before they occur. It is also for that reason that ministers visiting provinces right now, we're in the KZN just 2 days ago. She will be going back again next week. In 2 weeks' time, she's going to the Eastern Cape. She was in Limpopo. She's listening, talking to school principals, to district officials, provincial officials, civil society, unions, everyone that's involved in education, so that we can listen and find better ways of dealing with these things. So there's so much more that we solve by talking than just what you're seeing in the Eastern Cape.
Let's talk about the schools that have been officially shut down by the Department of Education. We know, especially in the rural Eastern Cape, parts of the Eastern Cape, why shut down and not place teachers and then have a better system where, because now you're moving a huge mass into other schools. Is that a solution?
We have a national program. It's called Mergers and Rationalization. If a school has less numbers that cannot justify it remaining open, that school will have to be closed and merged with another one. And that happens in the normal course of business, and there's a process of consultation that happens with the community, civil society, and everyone else that's involved. And at the end of it, we close the school, merge it to another one, provide transport for those learners to go to the other school. Because if a school has less numbers, it means that you'll still have you'll be wasting money. Well, not wasting money. It's a waste simply because you are paying teachers that are not teaching the required number of learners inside a classroom. So that situation cannot allow to happen. You need to redirect that money to other resources that are required in education. So that happens in the normal course of business.
Well, you're still watching Rights and Recourse right here on SABC News Channel 4. For today, we're touching on issues that are facing the Department of Basic Education. 50 schools so far have been shut in the northern areas of Port Elizabeth. The question we're asking is, what is the department doing about it? And what other issues can we look at when we look at the issue, or rather the sector of education in the Eastern Cape in general? Join us at Rights and Recourse. We'll continue after this. right, welcome back. You're still watching Rights and Recourse right here on Channel 404. Well, before the break, we had the spokesperson of the Basic Department of Education telling us that the department is doing far much enough to ensure that they remedy the issue of closed schools in the Eastern Cape. And right now, we're going to interact with Ntutuzo Nzomo, reminder that is joining us on the line. Ntutuzo?
Yes.
Yes. Ntutuzo, you heard Elijah saying that it's not that the department is not doing enough. It's simply that there is no cooperation, or rather the department brings solutions to the table, but the society is not, or rather the communities aren't really willing, or rather looking at taking the solutions.
You know, as a government official or as a department, that should not be the right response on these issues. Because as we are having this interview right now, we know that about 2,000 schools are going to be closed down in the Eastern Cape. Some of them are already closed down. And the reason for this is that they're dwindling numbers. But organizations that work in the Eastern Cape, such as ours, and also concerned community members in the Eastern Cape, have been asking the list of those schools, so that it can be investigated whether there are dwindling numbers in those 2,000 schools. And the information has not been made available by the department, which is quite concerning. We've seen community members march to the provincial department asking when are their schools going to be built. And the provincial department has not responded to those community members. For example, there was a school last year which was shut down by the community, where they said that they are not going to allow the teachers to get in because the school had been promised for several years that a new building will be built for them, and that, you know, by 2016 the school will be finished. But it was 2015 and the school had not been finished. And, you know, Mr. Elijah makes the point that infrastructure is something which is basic, that is really important for education, but the information regarding, you know, infrastructure in this country is not available. It's either it's available and it's vague, or it's not there, and that's the reality of the Eastern Cape. We've tried to get information about, you know, infrastructure and like the plans on how the department plans to meet the backlog which is currently faced by the province. And we have not been able to get proper information, detailed information that speaks to the schools that need to be built right now. There's a regulation which was passed in 2013 which is saying that, you know, schools that are built out of asbestos, metal, wood need to be built by the end of this year, before November 29.
All right.
And we have not received any progress report on that. And as South African citizens, that's information which needs to be available to us.
All right. Elijah, it seems like there is this inaccessibility of information as far as your role is concerned in this issue of schools. But let's rather now get into the issue of underperforming schools. Earlier in the beginning of the year, it was reported that in Gauteng alone, 9 independent schools performed below 40%, with 3% getting 0% pass rate. You know, a rare rate in the 2015 NSC examination. Is this perhaps, now that you are saying that this is part of your program as the Department of Basic Education, to close some schools and to perhaps move those students to schools that would better provide for them?
Well, independent schools are but just that, independent schools, which means they're privately run by individuals who apply for a license and are granted such license to operate a school. What we then do as a department is to support them financially in the form of a subsidy, but also to give them curriculum material and to ensure that they adhere to the program and management, project management of the department, which means they need to adhere to the school calendar that public ordinary schools are using. And the MEC in Gauteng of Education has said that he needs to pay more attention to independent schools, because that's where it seems more challenges can be seen, particularly when it comes to learning outcomes.
Have any appointments been made for HODs in schools in the Eastern Cape and KZN, especially those that underperformed as promised by the Minister?
Yes, in fact, she's there. She looked at the plan on Friday. We were there. They presented a plan. She was not happy with the plan. She told them to rework the plan and promised that she would be back in KZN next week. She will be there on Tuesday and Wednesday to finalize the recovery plan for the province. So we hope that some announcement will come out. next week as far as KZN is concerned. But there's a huge shortage. I mean, we're in Limpopo last week as well. We're told that they needed 516 school principals, but 322 deputy principals and 974 HODs. And you need to find those people somewhere, and at the moment they're not available, which means a province must look to another province to try find those people. So it's a huge challenge for us. It's a huge challenge for the Department of Higher Education and Training as well, because it is that department that produces teachers at university level. What we do is to provide some funding through a bursary scheme to ensure that we produce as many teachers as possible so that we can have a larger pool for us to get HODs and deputy principals as well as school principals.
Now, Kate, in 2016, why are students still struggling, learners rather, still struggling to have textbooks?
To have textbooks? I thought you were going to ask me about the private schools, which I would like to weigh in on for a
Let's
second.
first deal with this one, the issue of textbooks
Sure.
and desks. Why in 2016 is still that an issue in basic education?
I think that the issue of textbooks relates to all of the other provisioning issues, which is that the departments don't have accurate data. So we found consistently, as with equal education, that when we ask for figures, we're provided with incorrect figures, including the numbers of schools. So we found that schools that we liaise with the Limpopo Department of Education about on a regular basis are still not included in their plans. And that's ridiculous. We've brought them to their attention, and it's as if they don't even exist. They're not in any of their systems, it appears, from the information that they give us. And it's completely impossible for a department to be providing textbooks to each learner where they don't even know how many schools there are in the province. So that's the first thing that needs to be sorted out.
Elijah, it seems like the burden is far too much for you as the department.
It's not too
if
much.
you can't provide statistics as to who is where and how many learners you have in this province or in this region, then clearly, you know, getting the issue of infrastructure, as Kate has alluded, that getting textbook to those learners will be quite a challenge.
The same schools she's talking about are receiving other services. It's just that when they seek information, they get given different figures, which is also a challenge that at national level we are facing, that our data is not as credible, is not as accurate as we want it to be. But you know, as for Limpopo, there was an audit that was conducted there by State SA to establish exactly the number of schools in that area. But we are implementing an electronic system that will enable us to know the number of schools that we have across the country, province by province, also the number of learners that we have in our system. We have such information because when we send circulars...
But where do you send this information? Here, NGOs and private entities that are willing or rather interested in the interest of the betterment of education in the province, saying that you do not give them the correct statistics.
Yes, I just said to you that the very schools that she's talking about are receiving other services. So it doesn't mean that those schools are completely cut out. It's just a matter of data capturing and making sure that that school is also listed in one list that will include all the schools. That's the gap that we have at the moment. And we're working towards correcting that because we realize that human nature is not able, especially when we involve several people at different levels of government, you are not able to get the accuracy that you want. That's why now we're moving towards implementing an electronic system which will help us identify all the schools where they are. Even as we close some and build some, we need to know where the schools are, what they have and what their needs are. That's what we need. We need to clean up our data, and that's that we've admitted to that. It's something that we need to do. And it's also comes from historical factors where some schools were built by communities and government took those schools over. So it's a whole host of things. But we appreciate the work that they do. They bring to attention certain issues that we need to attend to. All that we need is to make sure that everyone is on the same page when it comes to the data that we have as a system.
All right, you're still watching Rights and Recourse right here on SABC News Channel 444. In studio, I'm joined by Mr. Elijah Mhlanga, Department of Basic Education spokesperson. I'm also joined by Kate Peterson, who is an attorney at Section 27. And online, I'm joined by Ndutuzo Nzomo, Deputy Secretary General from Equal Education. You can join us and also be a part of our discussion. Send me an email to rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. After the break, we'll continue with our discussion. now, Johan. You were saying? Welcome back. You're still watching Rights and Recourse right here on SABC News Channel 44. As I said before the break, we're dealing and looking at the issues of school shortages, or rather the schools that have been shut down in northern areas of Port Elizabeth. I'm joined by my panel in studio to help me answer some of the questions that you've been asking, especially following some of the media reports we've had. Let's come to you, Ntutuzo rather. You heard Elijah saying that the department is doing enough, and then you had Kate saying that there isn't accurate data when it comes to the department flowing down to other organizations that are looking at this issue. But then Elijah bounced back and he said those are independent schools, and there are certain programs that are dealing with the issues that are facing those schools. It seems like the department, if you're looking from this side, is doing enough to ensure that the issues that are facing the schools are met.
Well, the spokesperson of the department spoke about, knowing the number of schools in the different provinces. Last year in November, there was a plan which was released by the Provincial Department of Limpopo, which was meant to give a detailed report of the infrastructure problem in Limpopo and what they are planning to do to make sure that the issue of infrastructure is dealt with. From that report, the Provincial Department of Limpopo did not know, as I did mention this before, but they did not know 75% of those schools, their infrastructure situation. So they didn't know if they had water or electricity. So the information that the spokesperson is speaking about, I wish it could be available to us as Equal Education and also Section 27. Because what has been released is vague, or it actually is inaccurate, or it's information that does not link up with some of the reports they've released in the past. But me having said that, I just want to make the point that there are provinces which have been progressive in giving us proper information. We saw with the index report which was released by the Provincial Department of Education in Gauteng when schools opened. So the 9th learners who currently have no places in different schools, it's something which the Provincial Department spoke about. They said that there were 16,000 learners that were not going to have places in the schools that they have within the province, and they came up with solutions. Although that's another discussion for another day regarding the solutions, but the mere fact that a province was able to gather such information and also talk about, the infrastructure problems that they'll be facing in 2016 proves that the information does exist, but it's not made available to the general public.
All right. Information not being available to the general public. Let's now come to the issue of Gauteng. We also know that in Gauteng also had some educational issues. Over 9,000 learners still not placed in Gauteng. Earlier this year it was 16,000, and now the number has gone down to 9,000. Why do we still have 9,000 learners not placed?
Well, the records that we had as a department, particularly in Gauteng, before schools opened, were that there were 16,000 learners which were not placed. When schools opened, there were 3,000 more that came from nowhere that we didn't prepare for. And that number shot up to 19,000. By the end of the first week, the number had been reduced by 3,000, down to 16,000. Which means the original problem remained even at the end of the first week. Now, we needed to see what to do with it. We had to increase the ratio of learners in a classroom to try to accommodate them. We had to move mobile classrooms from low-demand areas to high-demand areas to try to accommodate learners that still did not have a place. We also had to procure new mobile classrooms, just trying to accommodate learners. And these are learners, one, who had not applied in time when they were invited to do so in April last year, with the closing date being May. And two is learners who came late to request for spaces in our schools. But we also had a general demand for schooling in Gauteng, which means the existing physical structures that were already here were not sufficient to accommodate this large number that has taken place in Gauteng. Yet new schools have been opened in Gauteng. Over 20 schools in the past 2 years have been opened, but even those schools are not helping, because it seems there's still a huge demand.
If then there's such a huge demand for education in general in the country, I mean, I'm sure even in the Eastern Cape there are still learners who are looking at placement. Why shutting down schools?
In fact, the learners that are coming to Gauteng are coming from the Eastern Cape, some of them.
What could be the cause? Do you understand that migration, one of the huge issues is that people are looking for better opportunities, better economic environments, but it's specifically in education. What could be the root cause? Is it because perhaps the Department of Education in the Eastern Cape is not good enough? Is it because that as the department, national, you have to look at having the whole department, or rather the whole sector, under administration? What is the pushing force?
Putting the sector under administration is not going to assist, because you're still going to need the same people that are in the system to assist you to run the department. It's not about that. It's economic factors as well. You also have an issue of people moving to urban areas. It's not just here. You go to Limpopo, they'll tell you that grade R classes there are in huge demand, because there's a lot of young people who are getting jobs in the urban areas, living in the flats there. There are new settlements that are rising up in terms of property development. People are moving from rural areas to work in the cities. There are new families.
Why don't you then come up with a well-managed placement program for these schools? If you're in the Eastern Cape, stick in the Eastern Cape. We'll come up with a better education. We'll employ teachers. We'll have more temporal teachers who will adapt to the program, as opposed to seeing a lot of these students migrating, or rather learners migrating to Gauteng, and then having this backlog.
I thought I was trying to assist you. It's not just for education purposes. You're following your parents where they are.
But
if
in
they
this
get an
specific
opportunity,
issue, it is.
If your parents are in Gauteng, they say, come and live with us, the next thing that we need is a school. They didn't leave Eastern Cape because of education. It's because they got a better job, or their first opportunity at getting a job, which means they need to leave their province and come to a province which has job opportunities. Naturally, everyone will want to migrate towards that direction, which leaves schools in certain provinces under-resourced in terms of learners that should be in a classroom to warrant it to remain operating as a school. And as a result, you find that some schools have much lower numbers that are required. And as a result, those schools need to be merged so that we can maintain the norm that we require for us to consider a certain institution as a school.
Let's now get into the identity of these schools, the ones that qualify to be shut down. What qualifies a school to be shut down?
If the number is less than 135 learners, then it cannot be a school in terms of what the policy that we have right now, because it means your provision norm will not work. You might need to pay more for teachers who are not doing anything, because you don't have learners to teach in the first place. You might have 4 learners in a grade, and that will not be advisable to continue. In fact, it's not feasible for that particular school to continue as such. So you need to find another plan, merge it with another one, have the required numbers, move teachers around. But it is at that point where you have a problem where teachers don't want to move. They don't want to accept the changing environment that we are in.
Okay. I do understand that with the new program that you have, you co-join schools. If there's a neighboring school that is doing fairly well, then you move those learners to such schools. But teachers have been complaining that it's a lot of work upon their shoulders.
I don't understand in what sense, because you see, any change is uncomfortable for people until such time that they understand and embrace it. In a long term, you see the benefits of doing that. It's something that we need to continue to communicate as a department, because we understand that when you move a teacher, you're affecting the family of that particular person. So we need to take that into account as well. But we have a rural allowance, what we call a rural allowance, which enables some people to be able to adjust to a certain community where they are new, if they've been moved there due to the requirements of their work. And we try to accommodate them using that particular provision. Whether it's effective, that's another matter, but we try all that we can to make people comfortable in the new areas where they are redeployed to.
All right. Well, you're still watching Rights and Recourse right here on SABC News Channel 404. Join us after the break. We'll continue with our discussion. All right, welcome back. We'll continue with our discussion right here in studio. Now, let's look at solutions, proposed solutions. Let's come to you, Kate. Section 27, I do understand that you have got quite a number of ideas that you put on the table for the department to absorb. You wanted to make a comment on the issue of individual or rather private run schools early on in our discussion.
Yes, I think that there's a very big problem, particularly in Gauteng, with low-fee private schools. And the first thing which the MEC is aware of is that the private schools do need to be better regulated, because private schools aren't regulated in the same way that public ordinary schools are regulated. But the second thing is that it's very important for the public to be aware of the fact that this school is run like a business, and that often the rights of your child are not put first, and your child's schooling is not put first, particularly with low-fee schools. And parents should be careful of not sending their children to these schools thinking that they'll get a far better education than they will in public schools, because that's often not the case. And often parents end up being heavily in debt because of that. In terms of solutions generally, I think we've touched on data. That's the biggest thing. The first thing is that people, not us necessarily, I mean, we should have access to data that we ask for, yes. But remember, the data that we are looking at is the department's data. The departments provide us with data, they just don't have the correct data themselves. So the first thing is that the departments need to know how many schools they're dealing with, how many learners they're dealing with, and what their needs are. The second thing then is for them to be dealing with the low-hanging fruit. So if you can't provide textbooks, if you can't provide infrastructure, the very ordinary things that are deliverables, then you're in a lot of trouble. So those are the first things that the department needs to get right.
All right.
But it's a very complicated system, and there's a lot that needs to be done to fix this.
Tutuzo, let's come to you right there in Cape Town. What proposed solutions would you have for the department, specifically on this issue of 50 schools being shut down?
Well, if we want to close the inequality gap which currently exists in this country, the government needs to realize that the solutions are actually written down in our Constitution, and they are written down in the South African Schools Act, where before anything happens, there needs to be consultation with the different stakeholders in education. And this does not mean us as Equal Education of Section 27, but the parents that are sending their kids to school, they need to be consulted. And besides consultation, when there's an issue in a specific school, the department should try and address it. And this thing which we are seeing in PE, it's not something which is unique. It was bound to happen because PE is not an exception. There are several parents out there in South Africa who face the same problem, where their learners don't have enough teachers. And the department needs to actually address those issues. And with the Eastern Cape, we know that there's a huge problem with the provincial department. And for a province that is under administration, the questions we should be raising should be to national. What are they doing about it? And also, if we move to other provinces, like the issue of information is a vital one. Because, as I've said, we do not know what is happening with infrastructure in Limpopo. And it's the same thing in the Eastern Cape. But in Limpopo, it's much more worse, where there seems to have been no information which existed before. While if you look at their previous reports, you see that they've reported on certain things, but there are irregularities when you look at their latest reports, proving that the first report that was released might have not been accurate or did not have the necessary information in them.
Okay. All right, and Ntutuzo, thank you so much for joining us right here on Rights and Recourse. That was Mr. Ntutuzo Nzomo, Deputy Secretary General from Equal Education. Now, let's come to you, Elijah. As the department, definitely, you will never get to a point where you admit that this pressure is more than you can handle. If the department of, rather the MEC of Eastern Cape, the Premier of the Eastern Cape, rather, came out calling the private sector to come and join, admitting in a way that they do need help, Here's an issue of being told that the information that you have, all these great policies and the strategies are not clearly communicated. Can we see a better relationship between you and these other stakeholders going forward?
In fact, the MEC or the Premier shouldn't even be asking for help because the education belongs to all of us. The system belongs to every citizen in this country. The Schools Act, the Constitution empowers each and every citizen to participate in making sure that the education system improves. So it cannot be an us and them type of situation. We are entrusted with the job of making sure that the policy is implemented, but we also know that not everyone in the education system has the same levels of dedication and commitment to making things work. That's why now we are talking about consequence management, which means people who are not performing their jobs as they should, there must be consequences for such people because we don't want them in the system. We want people who are committed to their job, people who will put the future of this country first above their own personal individual interest. And that's exactly the type of employee that we want to see in the system. But we also want the private sector to come in and assist us. We appreciate what the mining companies are doing. We appreciate what some of the banks are doing. We appreciate what some of the companies are doing to help us provide funding, avail officials that go into district offices to capacitate leaders, to motivate them, to remind them of the task that they have, that of making sure that they take care of the interest of the learner. We are all working towards the same goal. We differ in terms of the pace, we differ in terms of the approach, but we like being held accountable. We want and appreciate the work that Equal Education is doing. We want and appreciate the work that Section 27 is doing because they help particularly the National Department with monitoring so that we can hold people accountable as well. Because we don't have capacity to be in 25,000 schools. We rely on people on the ground. We rely on communities to bring these issues to our attention.
Ntutuzo earlier on made mention of an open consultation process, especially when recruiting for vacancies like the HOD, school principals. Are you perhaps looking at that going forward?
We have a process, and the process involves SGBs who represent communities. We have unions that are also part and parcel of that appointment process. But we've realized that that also has brought problems where we found that certain posts were pre-arranged and certain people identified to get those jobs. And those jobs, it seems, would be secured for those people at whatever cost. And we are now looking at the report that Professor Volmink has put together with his team after the job for cash scandal came out. And we are now looking at revising the entire appointment process to ensure that people still have a role. But to what extent will they be involved, that's something that is yet to be determined. But of course, if communities do their part, if communities monitor what happens in schools, they know which teacher is teaching, which is not teaching, and make recommendations. Certainly action should be taken against those that are not doing their job, but we must also appreciate those that do their job so that we can motivate others. We need good role models in the system.
Quickly before we closed, the issue of 500 schools that have been closed, rather 50, and the 9,000 learners who are still not placed in Gauteng, what can we look forward to? What targets have you set for yourself as the basic department?
Well, in Gauteng, the province is working on a daily basis to find space for those learners in the schools. Now that schooling has settled down, they're looking around to see if the space that can be used to erect mobile classrooms or build proper structures to try extend the schools so that there could be spaces. They are working on a daily basis. We know and understand and in fact sympathize and empathize with the parents that are still queuing in district offices because we understand that their children are being denied an education simply because of space that is not available in our school. But we are doing all that we can to assist them. As far as the Eastern Cape is concerned, we hope that because some progress is being made, the community there will understand and allow education services to continue while the rest of the issues that are still outstanding are being dealt with. The minister will be there on the 22nd and 24th. If there are people who can come in an organized fashion to table their grievances to the minister, she will be welcome to listen to them.
In Port Elizabeth?
In the Port Elizabeth area. But to start with, we'll speak to the MEC, his top management, to find out exactly what has been done. Our job is to monitor and support and come up with other interventions that can assist, stabilize education in that area.
All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us right here in Rights and Recourse. That was Angie who was joining us, or rather, let me start with Elijah Mhlangas, General Spokesperson, rather National Spokesperson for the Basic Department of Education. And then we had Kate Peterson, Attorney of Section 27. On the line, we're joined by Mr. Ntutuko Nzomo, Deputy Secretary General from Equal Education. Well, Elijah has made a damning statement, or rather a clear statement, that the department is doing all in its power to ensure that the 50 schools that have been shut in the Eastern Cape will be opened again. The Minister of Basic Education, Minister Angie Motshekga, is expected to be in Port Elizabeth in the northern areas on the 22nd and 24th of this month. Well, that was a Rights and Recourse for you. This program will be repeated at 5 on Monday morning. From me, Sipho Kwanza, and the rest of the team, it's goodbye. Till next time, God bless you.